The most obvious example now, given the cultural moment we're in, and this has to do with the undercurrents creating the waves. Title IX is a wave. The undercurrent, of course, has to do with the sexual brokenness.
But there's a couple of really important things I'd love to just be educated on today. And the first of which is Title IX and the new
Mhm.
developments with that. I think that's something that we really need to be aware of, and we need to. This isn't just one of those kind of fake photos that's floating by. This is an important thing that Christians need to be aware of. So maybe start with Title IX. Talk about the new, like what it is and the new developments that are happening, and then maybe we can go from there.
Well, there had been, basically, we had known that there was going to be a rewrite of the regulations surrounding Title IX that were going to come out, and that they were going to push forward some agenda items that particularly had to do with the definition of what it means to be human, male and female. And they came out and they were a doozy. So what is Title IX? Title IX is a section of basically civil rights law and basically trying to ensure equal access to people of different races and sexes was the original intent. Title IX specifically has to do with sex, and it specifically has to do with education. So this was designed to ensure that women had equal opportunities and access to educational opportunities, educational programs. So think about, housing, lodging, classes, degree programs, scholarship dollars, sports, things like that. Okay. Um, what's happened now with the growth of the regulative state, when we vote for a president, we don't just vote between two men or two candidates. We vote for about 5,000 people. And these are people that come along with the administration and are put into positions of power or influence or control over various departments. And we have seen over the last several years just how dramatically different these departments can look from one administration to the other. Uh, I think particularly in three areas. Number one, health and human services. So if you go back, for example, under President Obama, there was a Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, again, not elected, came along as an appointment because President Obama was elected. And she famously issued what was called the contraceptive mandate, in which employers had to provide contraceptions at their own cost to their employees. And she defined contraceptive in a way that included abortifacients, uh, medication that would cause abortion. And she also redefined what it who was actually required to participate in a way that really reduced down who counts as a nonprofit group. So the famous outcome here was a group of nuns were forced to
Yes, I remember
provide
this.
yeah, contraceptions. Now, where did that come from? How could the state just do that? That wasn't a law that was passed into legislation by the legislature. That wasn't anything that Congress ever dealt with. It was an unelected bureaucratic official over a particular department that wrote a rule. These rules are tend to be interpretations of law that's already in place. That's what's happened here in Title IX. So when Betsy DeVos was the Secretary of Education under President Trump, she did the same thing. She wrote laws having to do with how to interpret. One thing she did, for example, in Title IX is that the previous Secretary of Education had written a law that made it very easy to accuse a man of sexual abuse and rape on a college campus. So you might remember hearing things back then about rape culture on college campuses
Mhm.
and that we needed to trust the accuser and so on and so on. Now, there are terrible instances of sexual abuse, assault, harassment, rape on college campuses. So the way that that Secretary of Education dealt with it, and I can't remember who that was under President Obama, was to make it very easy for those accusations to go forward. Betsy DeVos thought that that went too far. It enabled retribution. It enabled things that weren't healthy. And so she backed off of that. So that's an example of how this can go different ways. The most obvious example now, given the cultural moment we're in, and this has to do with the undercurrents creating the waves. Title IX is a wave. The undercurrent, of course, has to do with the sexual brokenness. The L,
Mm,
the G, the B, the T, the Q, the I, the A being the examples of normalizing sexual behavior and sexual identity alternatives across culture. So there was thought, what was going to come out of this Department of Education for Title IX, and what was it going to do to women's access? So again, remember, Title IX was initiated to enable women's access and opportunities. But we're in a cultural moment where we can't define what a woman is,
right.
or we define a woman to include men who identify or dress as pre-surgical, post-surgical, or whatever. We all know the story of Riley Gaines, the swimmer from the University of Kentucky, who looks over in the locker room and there's a, you know, pre-surgical male. I don't even know how, this language is so problematic,
It's made
right?
it really hard to even talk about it, right? Because the words have
Here's
been changed so much.
Here is yeah, I don't even wanna say biological male because it's not like there's a biological male and a non-biological male. There's
Right.
just male and female, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a male and not only took away the, win that Riley had exclusively, I think they tied in this particular race, but then also violated private spaces. Title IX is designed to protect private spaces and protect sports opportunities. President Biden has, in fact, uh, his Department of Education has, in fact, issued new regulations of Title IX that give men full access to women's sports and private spaces. And to not do so, then, because it's put into this category of legislation that has to do with discrimination and civil rights and equal opportunity, means that if a man is not allowed into a woman's spaces or opportunities or scholarships or whatever, then essentially what you end up having is discrimination in the same way uh, that we were trying to correct. Think about back in the civil rights era, if a black family were driving across the South to go visit loved ones or just to go on vacation, they may have reached parts of the country where they couldn't find a hotel or they couldn't find a restaurant or they couldn't get gas for their car. In other words, these were things that limited their participation in public life. So now we're putting this on the same level as that.
Mm,
I'll give you another example of how this is playing out on the state level. I live in Colorado, and Colorado just passed and signed a law which said that teachers had to refer to students by any chosen name they give. This is not even about pronouns anymore. Literally, what this means is if I'm a student and I demand that my teacher calls me he today, cat tomorrow, Zer the next day, and robot the next day, the teacher has to acknowledge and abide by whatever I demand
hmm.
as a student. And if they don't, this is the other part of it, because this is the same force of the Title IX regulation on a federal level as this is having on a state level. To not do so is discrimination.
Mm.
Now, that word discrimination has a very specific history, has a very specific meaning. Literally, what the state of Colorado is saying is if a teacher refuse to a student as a cat, like the student demands, that is the same thing as using a racial slur against
Wow.
a student of ethnic minority. Do you, so
Yeah.
you see here that these are issues, but they smuggle in these definitions and ideas that are just wow. What we're smuggling in the Title IX rewrite is that there's really nothing to a woman
Yeah.
other than a label.